and action in Congress perhaps dimmed a little bit. We sat around thinking, what can we do to keep the fire burning? What can we do to make sure that there was still momentum and activity and a sense of progress and forward momentum around issues that we care very deeply about, which is around this agenda that we call now clean energy. There's a million different ways of looking at it, but with the basic simple idea that we know that the energy paradigm that we had in the 20th century just simply is not sufficient for what we as a nation and the world needs in the 21st century, and that the more that we can put our thumb on the scale to help move things forward, the better it is for all. So we're here to keep the fire burning. We've worked, Claire Giesen, who runs the project day to day, has done a remarkable job now over the last 6 months in bringing into this room really extraordinary leaders who have inspired us, who are making change at the local level, state level, at the national level, at the international level. And what's been exciting for us, if you take a step back from any one of the individual events that we've put on, is this idea that real significant progress is being made in transitioning the U.S. to a better energy future all across the country. And the discussion we're going to have today is one that, one of our first events we ever did in this project is with Shai Agassi. And Shai is a good friend, and some of the original founders of Project Better Place are good friends of ours. This is an issue around electric vehicles that we've shown a lot of interest in over a long period of time. Michael Granoff, who's a guy I've known since he was an undergraduate at Tufts and a very dear friend of mine. And so this has been an impressive set of inspirational events that we've done. And so I also want to welcome, before I introduce Claire, we're using a new technology that I encourage all of you to try out called Spreecast, which has a little bit of YouTube, a little bit of GoToMeeting, a little bit of Ustream. It's a way to bring your events closer to people, and there are people online right now watching it. Today, for those of you who are watching, we're not going to be able to, one of the neatest features it has, it allows people on the web to actually, if they have a webcam, to get into the stream and the picture and ask questions and interact with the person. It is really a brand new technology, 10 days old. We're sort of a beta test site for it. We won't be, if you're watching online, you won't be able to do that today, but you can ask questions using the mechanism that's on the Spreecast site. So welcome to all of you who are Spreecasting in its first 2 weeks of existence as an online tool. And certainly I encourage everybody here to check it out. We think it's a great way to bring you closer to your audiences outside of your offices and your day-to-day activities. So thank you all for being here. Let me introduce Claire Giesen, who works her butt off here every day. She has so much, she has her own incredible fountain of energy herself and has been a great leader of this project. Claire, welcome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming, and it is my pleasure and honor to introduce a first-class panel. These are an extraordinary group of folks involved in electric vehicle industry. Not only are they extraordinary and brilliant and talented, but they're also extremely patient and indulgent of the fact that when you got your first invite, I totally butchered everyone's name, if not their name, their title, if not their title, their company. And they were just really nice about it, and I sure appreciated it because I didn't know anybody except for Barbara. And this panel started out because I was sitting next to Barbara at a Quinn Gillespie event, and I looked at her and I said, Barbara, oh no, I said, I kept kind of, you know how when you think you know somebody and you're kind of sidelong, giving a little glance there. So finally at the end of the program, I said, well, you know what? You're either famous or we know each other. And as it turns out, both are true. I worked at the Department of Energy and also at USDA on renewable energy technology. And I did, in fact, work with Barbara in, at that time you were with, that's right. And anyway, the other thing is that she's famous. And everyone knows Barbara, and everyone has such a great respect for her and her vast knowledge of the electricity industry. She's probably forgotten more about electricity than a lot of us in this room know. She's just really smart, and we got together and plotted out a panel. And I'm so happy that everyone agreed to do that. So she's going to go first, and Genevieve Cullen is going to go second. Many of you probably worked with Genevieve because in her earlier life, when, as Miles says, she gave up her human rights to work on the Hill, she worked for Evan Bayh, and she also worked for the Vice President when he was a Senator, Joe Biden. She is apparently one of the most charming and delightful people you can ever work with, which just goes to show you that working in electricity is not such a boring thing after all. And if, in fact, you ever thought it was, the third person on our panel is Miles. And he is one of those guys that needs no introduction. Almost everybody knows Miles. And what we know about him is if something happened, if Congress were really truly to disband EPA and do a lot of the other things and the sort of electricity programs were to go to hell, he would be on the Colbert Show. If not, he'd be on Jon Stewart, or they'd be having a show all on his own. The humor of electricity. So I'm not worried about your employment abilities. And the fourth is Mary Beth Stanek, who amazed me when I asked her, tell me something about yourself that's of a little bit of a human interest. And I was just agog to hear her say that the ups and downs of Congress didn't bother her, that she was unfazed and she still had a huge passion for her job, which a lot of it has to do with electric vehicles. I know a lot of us at NDN, we get totally depressed when, we see the daunting mountain of opposition in Congress to energy issues, and apparently Mary Beth is undaunted, moving forward. She is a new person to D.C., coming from DTA originally, and she and her husband have been here for a year. Loves it here, so do I. And I'm so happy you're going to be on our panel. And the last person is Kyle Davis. And you know what? He must be a hell of a guy. Everyone likes him, but I couldn't get him to tell me one thing about himself to introduce. He doesn't have a Facebook. He's not on LinkedIn. I couldn't find him. No one would gossip about him. So I can only say that you have incredible integrity, and everyone must like you, and you're very proficient in what you do, very passionate about energy. Anyway, I am so pleased that you guys are with us, and I know this is going to be an excellent program, panel. And with that, I turn it over to Barbara, the famous Barbara.
Yes. Thank you very much, Claire. That's a very kind introduction, and it's a real privilege to be here with all of you. The one thing that Claire did not say is that I'm with the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI. So I'm going to begin talking just for a few minutes about EPRI, in case some of you are not acquainted with the organization, and then talk a little bit about the power system of the future, the role of batteries in that power system, which is an exciting topic and a very strong emerging area of technology. Then focus again on the infrastructure as we look at the interaction between utilities and the automobile sector. You've got some transportation sector experts right here on the panel, so I will let them talk about that. But the infrastructure is the space where we try to contribute to electric transportation, so that will be my focus. So just to begin, EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, was founded almost 40 years ago. And essentially what the utility leadership, the NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and the congressional leadership at the time all came together. This was after the outages in the 1960s and 70s, and they said, we have got to have somebody who can scan the long-term horizon and identify technology solutions to our challenges. And with that, they brought together EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute. We covered the entire electricity sector from generation to end use. We touch 90% of the domestic electric utility industry who participate in our programs and services. And then we also have expanded and are now international as well. And you can see that we are covering the entire power system of the future. So talking about that, let's look here. We see the power system beginning, and of course appropriately, with electric vehicles, something that has not been integrated in the past, but I'm going to touch on all the many new technologies that are coming into that power delivery infrastructure and why it is so important that we advance the technology of the grid through communications, through greater intelligence, to be able to accommodate all of these different technologies. And again, there is, you see, both electric vehicles and energy storage, and that will be something I will be focusing on because energy storage is very interesting. It has dual applications. It's not only the battery support in the transportation sector, it also is the grid support for renewable energy and other forms of intermittent resources. So we can see there we're advancing on all fronts here, and it's a very exciting time in the power delivery world. So as we see the grid changing, we see originally how it was, and then it continues to grow. And now we also know that electronics is a growing part of the load. In fact, we predict by 2030, 30% of the electricity load in this country will be with electronics. Some of those have not even been invented or conceived of at this time, but I think we all know, and I see some of those devices around here today, we all know that electronics is becoming a very important part of the energy load. We're experiencing terrific energy efficiency with the traditional load sources, but again, we'll see a lot more of that type of load as the years go by. So we want to, of course, integrate that into the system. We also want to, of course, particularly for today's panel, we want to integrate electric transportation, and you see that as well. Very exciting areas there. Renewable energy, more and more attention is being paid to renewable energy. I won't go into that, that's not the topic today, but suffice it to say that renewable energy has intermittent capabilities. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. So again, the storage is going to be an important factor in its success, but we are working around that because we can make the grid more resilient and more capable of that intermittency, and so that's a big part of the EPRI technology work. And then as we look forward, we can see that that smart grid infrastructure and the role of batteries is critical to enabling that to happen. That is important not only for peak load shaving, electric transportation, intermittent resources, as I mentioned, but you can also see that it can be used to help balance the system and provide storage in a number of different ways. And so there, although the vehicle to grid is still a few years away, it even has that promise for the future. So a lot of exciting news on the technology front here. And you can see it, all of that is around the importance of the battery. So let's move on and talk once more. We see that the battery can be integrated, but it must be integrated into the entire system. We at EPRI work on that power delivery infrastructure. We want to make sure that everything comes together perfectly, because as you can see, as we look at a Chevy Volt Pack, it actually can be used, as I mentioned, for peak shaving at the residential level. It can also be used, as we see here, to support the distributed energy system by adding more battery support. And there we see a subsystem with that capability. And finally, and we're counting them as they emerge here, we can see that with a number of Chevy Volt Packs that actually we can use that even to support the substation itself. So there's a great deal of opportunity around storage. It is a breakthrough technology, but we are still working on it. It's still costly. We'll get into that fact. But again, very exciting possibilities. So we look at the two main forms of transportation, and I know Mary Beth's going to be talking much more about this, so I'll just suffice it to say you have two different technologies. You've got your plug-in hybrid combination of gas and electric, and then you also have the Nissan Leaf all-electric. Those are the two main forms of transportation technology today. We at EPRI are working to support the automobile industry by convening the utilities as this all began going forward. With our collaborative role that we have, it was a natural place for the utility industry to come and to interact with the automobile industry, and we very much appreciate that chance to work together to advance electric transportation and the infrastructure to support it. So let's talk about that infrastructure that supports it. There's currently 3 levels of charging, and you see there that the first level is a typical appliance level, and then or just a standard level, then appliance level, and finally the DC fast charging, which is still emerging. Some of that has not come to fruition yet on a commercial basis, but we are continuing to work in that area. With the level 2 charging, you're talking about maybe 4 or 5 hours of charging, whereas with the level 1, it's 8 to 10. We've done some interesting surveys and work in that area, and I'll be talking then about that, which is you can see there that there is support for a public charging infrastructure, but that is a somewhat costly enterprise. And typically what people are looking at, and it does vary, actually interestingly, by the part of the country that they actually reside in. In Southern California, there's a strong predisposition to have the charging infrastructure actually at home, whereas in other parts of the country, the Midwest and the eastern areas, when we've polled the customers there, there's more of an interest in having workplace charging. So we'll need to explore all of these options. We will not have a successful electricity technology that will go forward to support transportation if we don't make sure that we're covering all the options that the customers have. As we know in today's world, customers have one first impression, and so we want to work together, all of us, to make sure that that's a positive experience and that we're meeting their expectations. And as we see here, we know, again, that the home charging and workplace charging offer the opportunity, particularly, actually our own electric transportation director drives a Chevy Volt, and so this is an example of what his workday commute is like. And you can see there that he has 92% electricity utilization on his 50-mile round-trip commute. So we're very excited to be supporting not only the public at large and the utility industry, but also our employees and perhaps some of your employees as they test out this new transportation technology. So I mentioned that one of the challenges around the battery, and again, the battery being such an important part of this, is the cost. We currently are looking at the lithium family chemically to support that, but it is a costly manufacturing process. You see here, and Mary Beth, I know, knows this, that a substantial body of lithium manufacturing does reside in the state of Michigan, and so there's a great deal being done there. But as we look out, you can see that although we anticipate a fairly precipitous decline in the cost of the batteries, it does flatten by the year 2015 or so, indicating that we will need to keep advancing that technology in order to bring those costs down. It's a very short-term good news story, but we want to continue to persevere so that it is also a long-term good news story. So there we see that the costs are declining. As we look out, again, we know that there's a number of things happening in this arena, but one of the exciting possibilities is, could we recycle the batteries? They typically do not use their entire energy level and capabilities, so it's a promising opportunity to then recycle and reuse them for other purposes. That's another area of endeavor that EPRI is engaged. And you see there that it's a full cycle. But there's many questions. This is a highly nascent R&D area right now, and you see some of those questions on the screen, and is this really going to be viable, or will it ultimately be cost-worthy? So as we look out, we are advancing from all the different earlier forms of battery technology. As I mentioned, we are currently in the lithium family, currently with the lithium ion, but very exciting opportunities around lithium air. Lithium air, as opposed to the 40-mile radius we're talking about today with the lithium ion, lithium air would actually extend that 10 times. So, for example, you could drive for 400 miles instead of 40 before you would need to recharge. For example, instead of having a 4-hour backup on your computer, you could actually have a 40-hour backup battery on your computer. You wouldn't even have to take any plug-in supplies with you on a short trip for a few days. This kind of revolution is coming, but it will take continuing R&D to get there. And as we saw, if anyone was at the ARPA-E Energy Summit earlier this year here in Washington, we saw that the Poly Plus battery was on exhibit there with the Secretary of Energy, as you can see, showing keen interest in that. And that is a lithium-air battery that they have said will be available within the next couple of years, and it's light enough that you can hold it in your hand. So you can see there's a lot of excitement, a lot of interest in what can happen with battery technology. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Genevieve Cullen, who's going to talk a little bit more about the transportation sector itself. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. So I'm Genevieve Cullen. I'm with the Electric Drive Transportation Association. Just to give you a little perspective, we've been around for about 20 years. My members represent the entire supply chain of electric drive, everything from people in the rare earths industry, automobile and truck manufacturers, battery and component suppliers, as well as people in the smart grid segment, charging infrastructure, and down to the retail side, people of Best Buy and UPS who are buyers and sellers of vehicles and infrastructure. I also want to, I think, I'm sure everyone in the room has, done their homework or is involved in this in some way, but I always think it's worthwhile to just take a minute to clarify what we're talking about. Electric drive is anything where electricity moves the wheels, where you swap out oil with electricity. So there's a grid-connected and not grid-connected versions of these technologies. You're familiar with the hybrid. We're calling that old technology, right? It's 10 years old. And there's fuel cells, which are coming into the market in the next couple of years. But in the grid-connected side, there's pure battery and plug-in hybrid, as Barbara pointed out. And so what I wanted to cover here is just give sort of a snapshot of what it is, why you should care about it, and what we're supposed to do about it. I'll give you some homework afterwards. But I think it's important, it bears repeating that why do we care about electric drive? Why the push? Why is everybody so interested? Not just because it's a cool technology, because oil dependence is at the root of every major challenge we face as a society, right? And we need to correctly measure the costs and benefits of that as we make our policy decisions going forward. And once again, it's a song you've heard before. I will just move through it fairly quickly, but come on. Our transportation sector is 90% dependent on oil. We import more than half of our needs. Electricity is domestically produced from diverse sources. Petroleum is 20% of our trade deficit. We're going to spend over $400 billion on it this year. Electricity costs somewhere between 3 and 5 cents a mile, as opposed to, say, 12 to 15 cents a mile for gasoline. And, although it's sort of out of fashion to care about this, but it turns out that combusting oil also creates air pollution and greenhouse gases, if you believe in those. So electricity not only is cleaner, even with the current base load capacity, which is dominated by coal, but also think of how much easier it is to manage the emissions from stationary sources as opposed to 250 million light-duty tailpipes. So that's why you should care about it. So where are we standing? As you know, the plug-in vehicles rolled out this year. GM and Nissan rolled out their vehicles. In the next couple of years, there'll be more than 20 by the end of next year, closer to 30 in the next couple of years after that. Investment in charging infrastructure is projected to be $5 to $10 billion by 2015. So the industry sees the opportunity, and they are investing and moving aggressively forward. And I just want to give you a sort of a snapshot so that you see what's out there now and the diversity of it, and what's coming to market. And those are at all different price points, ranges. There's a configuration to meet your needs, whether you're a neighborhood commuter or whether you are a UPS delivery man. There's a configuration of electric drive that will meet your needs at a price point that fits in with your economic profile. And then the next logical question is, how do we fuel them? And as Barbara said, the utility industry is moving forward with the same amount of optimism and investment in accommodating grid-connected transportation. So forgive me, that's a misprint up there, 110 or 220. It's actually, it's 120 or 240. Most people will be charging, 80% of their charging will be at home or at work. And you can use your standard 120 plug or the 240. As everyone always says, that's like the thing you plug your dryer into. But there's also, and people say, well, can the grid handle it? Well, study after study has documented that even if 70% of if the fleet were grid connected, that could be powered by today's capacity if we just manage the load. It just takes some grid management, but we wouldn't need to build any new capacity to accommodate it. And as Barbara also pointed out, meeting and planning for load growth is what utilities do. When people air conditioned their homes, when the dishwasher was invented, when people decided you had to have 16 flat screen TVs, utilities prepare for that and they plan accordingly. We also see there's a great growth in diversity and options of charging outside the home in level 2 chargers, but also increasing investment in fast charging, which would be 480. And for now, most people see that making its first entry in sort of commercial fleets. That's not something you actually want to have in your house. But I think the technology is on the cusp, the industry's on the cusp, consumers are interested. I think finally, the villagers are storming the castle like it's enough. We need an alternative to oil. But there's some challenges, right? There's a technology challenge, as Barbara pointed out. Again, the batteries and the components, they need to be cheaper, and people will expect better and better performance. There's market challenges. New technology is more expensive, and there's a consumer acceptance challenge, right? It's your car, it's expensive, you have to learn to think about it differently because you don't go to the gas station. So there's an education component to this that's really important. And of course, there's a regulatory challenge, right? So the existing regulatory structures that govern electricity and fuel efficiency, and they measure their costs and benefits, they need to recognize a new technology that falls in both of those territories. And just to focus in a little bit, so on the technology side, as battery costs have come down amazingly by more than half since 2008. I think, when we were first talking about that plug-in tax credit, the incremental cost of a lithium-ion battery was estimated at $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Now the market is putting that, in the 5s, and some people say lower, but it's hovering at about half. And there's been great investment in battery manufacturing and advanced vehicle manufacturing. But as you know, the trend in Washington is heading the other way, and I think making premature or misguided, decisions to just cut and run from the investments we've already made would be a mistake, and I think it's a struggle we're all going to have to take on in the next couple of years. So in the market hurdles, so as we talked about, it's cost and education, and there are tax incentives to help people, consumers and businesses, make those investments, right? So there's a tax credit for installing charging infrastructure, but it does expire at the end of this year, which would be most unfortunate timing. There's a plug-in electric drive vehicle credit, which gets a lot of bad press. People are throwing around, it's anywhere from $2,500 to $7,500, depending on the performance, the degree of electrification of the vehicle. And it's an important one for helping consumers jump that first cost hurdle of this first initially expensive technology. And also in the medium and heavy duty segment, there's no incentive. There used to be, but it expired. And that is a highly U.S.-led segment of electric drive. And there's great opportunities for fuel savings, for business savings, and it's worth having another look. And other policies, there are, at the federal level, there's support for deployment through Clean Cities programs, which is really important about getting people comfortable seeing plug-in vehicles on the road, just seeing how it works, and knowing that it does work. And at the state and local level, communities are doing their own work to get ready, and they're devising policies about preferential parking and HOV lane treatment and registration, sales tax preferences, experimenting with ways to help communities and consumers adapt. And finally, we knew we'd have to get here. EPA and NHTSA, they're making, setting down the parameters of how you measure the efficiency and the emissions of grid-connected vehicles through 2025, and we have to be sure that the metrics they use accurately capture the benefits of electrification in its new territory as a matter of technology, as a matter of how it's actually used in the real world, and it's a relatively new matter for the regulators. So educating them is going to be an important challenge for us too. So I guess simply the takeaway is, as the news cycle waxes and wanes, what's in, what's out, what's going to save us, and what's a big bust, I think it's important to keep in mind this market is really on the cusp. We're ready, consumers are ready, and we have to just keep pushing forward. That we can't do it overnight. It's a huge fleet, 250 million light-duty vehicles. The cars stay on the road 12 to 15 years, so turning over the fleet is going to take some time, and we just have to make sure we work together, public and privately. Partnerships can make this happen faster. Thanks.
Howdy, I'm Miles Keogh from NARUC. It's a real pleasure to get to come out of the box and get to talk to you all today. Let me start by giving you three things to kind of frame the context of what we're going to be talking about. The first is you're going to have to forgive me because I have a scorching case of ADHD. And when I have to sit in the crowd and someone's talking to me and throwing their pearls of wisdom out, I just go berserk and fidget in the chairs. So it makes me crazy. So be warned, I'm probably going to poll y'all and have y'all raise your hands at different points. We'll try and skip calisthenics and push-ups, but you never know where I'm going to go with this stuff. Second is, I'm just going to give you fair warning. I think Claire may have brought me into this little palaver to be the bad guy. So every good conversation needs a bad guy, right? The reason why I'm the bad guy is not because I don't like electric cars. In fact, in 2010, Con Edison arranged for me to get behind the wheel of a Tesla, the little Sportster, for 3 blocks down Graden Avenue in downtown Chicago. And when I got out of that thing, having done some unbelievably unsafe driving in it, it looked like the Joker had shot me with a smile gun for about 3 days. I was talking like rapid fire succession for forever. I love them. The reason I'm the bad guy is because I advise the state public utility commissioners, who are the state regulators of the electric grid. And their whole job is prudence. And prudent decision-making, et cetera, doesn't tend to be very sexy. So I tend to walk in when folks are having a big festival of exuberance about something and water it all down with, a cold bucket of prudence. So that may be my role today to throw some prudence on this stuff. Let me just ask one quick question. How many folks in this room have a pretty good sense of the difference between a vertically integrated electric state and a restructured state? Anybody feel like they have a good sense of that? How many of y'all live in Maryland or the district? Okay, and how many of y'all live in Virginia? How many of y'all think that y'all is the second person plural in the English language? All right, bear with me. So the basic distinction for the purposes of today's conversation, vertically integrated states like Virginia and the other 24 states that are just like it, the utilities still own power plants. It's much more complicated than that, but for the purposes of today's discussion, Restructured states, they don't own power plants anymore. They buy from a marketplace where power plants compete with one another. And in vertically integrated states, utilities still own power plants. And that makes a difference when you follow the money. So why is the state regulator guy up here talking to you today? You remember the old line, the famous bank robber was asked, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, the regulators help the electric utilities get their money. So I'm up here because that's where the money is. So when we talk today, we're going to talk a little bit about the issues that arise when you try to follow the money back up the electric grid to source the fuel for the vehicles, to source the infrastructure that provides that to the vehicles and that has to adapt to these things. So NARIC members of the state public utility commissions, they oversee the rates, terms, and conditions of the provision of essential monopoly services. In all but one of the states, electricity falls into that category, but it's also natural gas, telephone service, water service, big chunks of the transportation sector. Anything where monopoly is provided to you, their rates and their reliability are set by state commissions. And I advise them. So that's what we're doing here today. One of the things that I've done in the electric car space is, remember how I talked about how I have ADD and hate sitting there? So as an educational tool, we've started to move into building and running games that allow decision makers to get their hands on things and play with them and determine out different scenarios. And we've now run 2 games that have looked at the integration of electric vehicles into the grid and what that could mean. So I've done a little pattern recognition on that, and that's mostly what's going to be informing what I'm talking about. Weasley disclaimer at the bottom. My opinions, not NARIC policy, nor the policy of any of its members. So if anyone gets dragged out of here by hooded goons, it's just me. It's not going to affect any of the states. So this has been the scenario that we've been using to try and, we always look for something to get our games going. Everyone says, well, electric vehicle adoption is going to be, really slower than expected. And in the game space, what you can do is you use a game to explore, far out boundary conditions, things that are fairly unlikely, so that you're more ready for all the things that are more probable, right? So we come up with scenarios. This was one scenario driver that we came up with that was, price of gas gets up around $7 a gallon, and the total cost of ownership for electric vehicles starts to look a lot nicer when electric prices are, in the 7 to 15 cents a kilowatt range, and gas prices go up near $7. And the kinds of drivers that we're talking about, they're not outlandish, they're not crazy. And usually when you apply 2 or 3 or 4 of them at once, you can see some pretty credible adoptions. So one thing that we try to work through with folks, I wish I could stand further out. I can? I'm going to Bob Barker this thing. Can I take this one? Oh, so many rules. Okay, I'm going to go with the rules. Okay, so the factors that we think about, how big an impact is it going to be on the grid? 1 is how many vehicles. 2 is what kind of vehicles. 3 is how are those vehicles going to charge. What we found is that the more electric dependent the vehicle is, the more people want to use big, fast pipe charging. That has it has a really significant and requiring management kind of impact on the distribution system. Where charging clusters and what kind of load shifting options are available to the utilities and what kind of options they take up. One of the things we're going to talk a little bit about today is smart grid. Anybody here not know what smart grid is? I don't know what smart grid is. So smart grid is a function in this. Smart policy, smart rates, smart regulation is another piece of this. So when matters. Electric vehicles we think can be helpful to the grid in the longer term. But one thing I want to kind of flag is that Barbara's presentation from EPRI did a pretty nice job of saying that vehicles as storage has promise, but it ain't here yet. And it ain't here for a while. So when we have been talking to folks, we've been saying, we know that looks really juicy, but in terms of implementation, we can't count on it in things like integrated resource plans, in things like long-term transmission plans, procurement plans, any of that kind of stuff. We haven't been able to integrate that into the near-term or even medium-term planning. Much more likely are the applications to smooth out the provision of electricity service. Right now, as load goes up and down, as more different people turn on light switches and turn on dryers and everything, the only response mechanisms we have to that are either sort of crude demand response mechanisms, or for 99.9% of it, we ramp the power plants up a little bit more, ramp them down a little bit more to balance what's being drawn off the system with what's being supplied into the system. And we think that electric vehicles as a large sort of farm of batteries may have some promise to help provide some of that smoothing or regulation services. If we have the capacity to put infrastructure in place in time, which Genevieve talked about, we've accommodated flat screen TVs and air conditioning, refrigeration. So depending on the speed of adoption, if we have time to do this, then there'll be some physical upgrades required, and it's really just a question of mapping where those will be. And then there'll need to be some regulatory adaptations made, which we've made for other things too. So given the time to go through that and figure out what works and what's not going to work, then we think that those will get made. One thing I want to note is that the worst thing you can do is encourage the adoption of a poorly thought out regulatory policy to back this stuff. Because nothing will kibosh a good idea more quickly than a poorly constructed mechanism for folks to get paid for their good idea. So the right people who are creating benefit need to reap the rewards of that, and so we need to come up with smart regulatory policy, which takes a little bit of trying some stuff, and it takes a little bit of time. It's not an overnight kind of thing. In the short term, we have one little concern, the when. Charging off-peak is great. So we go home, we plug in our cars at night, that's great. But if we plug in the middle of the day in an uncontrolled way, that the utility doesn't know where the charge is coming from, can't really follow the load to where it's coming on, and it happens at peak, then this could be a significant new load that could stress the distribution system. And even in some areas, like say in Washington, D.C., where EV adoption is possibly going to be higher than the norm, it could even stress some of the bulk transmission delivery to specific concentrated regions. Interestingly, the places where we know we have transmission congestion lines up pretty good with a lot of the places where we think we might get early adoption of EVs. So that's something that it's not an unmanageable problem unless we don't manage it. Finally, where matters. We talked a little bit about this. As long as we can predict the pattern of penetration, we think that we can upgrade the distribution system enough so that it doesn't freak things out and take down whole systems. But adoption does tend to cluster, so it does need to get figured out. During our game, this was one of the scenarios that we came up with. That's an actual charging station in the District of Columbia, and it was put in with ARRA money, but the provider at that spot doesn't actually charge you for the electricity when you go plug in. They charge you for premium parking, right? Which is great, except if we did this all over the place, we'd dump a bunch of these charging stations into core areas where there's already some electric congestion, and then there's kind of uncontrolled peak time, daytime charging happening without any kind of oh, thanks.
Does that matter?
Yeah, you pulled the other one out of the wall, but go ahead.
I just like to say she did it. It was Claire. I'm sure, I like how they trust me with the wireless one now. It's great. I can't possibly screw this up anymore now. So that's an example of something that's actually set up in a way that avoids regulatory oversight, that avoids any kind of capacity for planning, to plan away from the worst time charging without any kind of financial connection to when the charging occurs either. So this was a pessimistic case of what the gas station model would look like. Genevieve talked a little bit about how some folks will want to charge at home, some folks will want to charge at the workplace, and some will want public charging. we see some of the economics lining up for home charging if you can create the right incentives. One thing we've seen in the near term is that this gas station model, which a lot of folks say, well, we'll just set it up like a gas station. We found that the economics for it don't really work. You actually need to, in a place where you're charging 15 cents a kilowatt hour just for the energy, to break even on your cost, you'd need to charge $3.65 a kilowatt to break even on your infrastructure costs. So following that money, that's a pessimistic case. You can get it down to about 80 cents a kilowatt hour. Under the optimistic case, that's still pretty freaking expensive. So that's an area that the business model is going to need more work before it's ready for prime time. So here's my conclusion. I didn't actually talk about smart grid, even though I thought I would talk about smart grid. We can get into this. I'll make one statement, a spicy statement that you guys can use as your ammunition for throwing tomatoes at me. In playing these games, one of the things that we found is that the smart grid really helps. It really helps. If you have smart regulatory policy, if you have communicating electric infrastructure, that's great. But the vehicles are not going to, by themselves, make the business case for smart grid and vice versa. They're just two nice things that help each other, but are neither of them dependent on one another for financial or technical success. And with that, I look forward to the tomatoes.
Well, thanks everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the vehicle, and I want to talk a little bit to some of the elements that our presenters have mentioned too. I'm going to start with Miles. I'm going to pick on him because he's fun to pick on. You can tell he's got a good sense of humor. He told me going into this, he said, get ready. And I thought, oh, well, who is this guy? I don't see. Now I'm ready. Okay, so, all right. So I'm going to go through our scenarios a little bit and just kind of interject a little extra where it makes sense. From an automaker's perspective, this is how we see the world. We look at what the energy resource is, and as you all know, this varies around the world, and in large countries like the United States, there's a lot of regionalism. So we see a lot of different approaches based on natural resources and policies depending on what's available. So we look at that pretty seriously, and then we look at how to convert it, how it's being managed, not only at the vehicle level, but actually out in the field, how energy is actually produced and made ready for us. We spend a lot of time on our energy carriers. I mentioned, and I've mentioned this quite often because I hope something will happen here. We do know, like for instance with carriers, you're kind of know in the old days when you had cars, you'd have like a metal tank for fuel, and that's migrated to plastic tanks. It gives us more room to package the vehicle, lightens the vehicle. It's a very good use and very good change, and very good evolution. We're really moving very quickly into battery packs, and we're looking at more compressed storage tanks for CNG and also hydrogen. And we're really looking for better suppliers to make some of these Type 4 tanks and future tanks for the gaseous fuel. So this is an area that's very rich for new manufacturing and also supply in this country. And then once we wrestle through the energy carrier side, we go into what best propulsion system to use to move the real motors. And again, I think Genevieve and others and Barbara, they talked to that at great depth. I'll go into a little bit of these as we move through this presentation. So for this talk in particular, we're going to focus on the electrons, mostly batteries and fuel cells. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say there's a ton of work going on with better internal combustion engines, a lot with biomass to liquid fuels. It's a very rich area of work for us. But for today's discussion, we'll stick with electrons. Okay, in particular the Volt, much mentioned today, and thank you for that. We have sold quite a few Volts to date, and we are ramping up production. We have had very good field activity right now, as my team in particular works out in most of the states trying to ensure that when a Volt buyer comes and takes delivery of their car, their home has probably been already inspected. They have made a decision whether they're going to use a 120 charging cord, which comes with their car, or if they want to upgrade their home to put in a 240 in their garage or outside their garage on a pedestal charger. They also work more so lately with, we'll call it multi-dwelling units. It could be apartments, it could be workplaces, and that's where I think the rub is. We've really got to address this second area of charging where vehicles are most of the time. And I'll show you a chart in a minute that shows where vehicles are a lot. So we are working, this is working pretty well. I think for your benefit, we are seeing a lot of variability across the country. It takes a long time in California to get this worked out. They do a very thorough job over there, but it gets to the point where permitting costs and delays can run 3 times the time and cost over as you compare that to the East Coast. So we've got to work through a much better way to get the right people together, get all this brokered a lot quicker so that when you want to buy a car, regardless of OEM who makes it, you're not going to be, languishing because you want a fast charger or a 240 charger in your house or place of work. Impact on the grid. Well, here I go with my friend Miles over here. Okay, so we work with EPRI, and we work very closely with Barbara and Mark Duvall and many others, and Genevieve. We follow this like a squirrel watching a bird feeder. I mean, this is something that we don't let go. And we really looked at the impact. And, one of the things I think, and we do a lot of scenario planning too. We've done it in all the energy spaces. Sometimes we can scare ourselves quite a bit. Right now, if we look at the current trends that are happening, that's not necessarily a prediction of what the future is going to be. So I think Miles brought up a good one with the, we'll call it premium parking here in D.C. I'd like to know where that charger is, by the way. We have a few in our spot, but I think we have another place to charge, which is good. But that's not really a predictable business model of the future. A parking garage is not going to set it up that way because in the end, they're going to lose money. If they're paying more for electrons on their utility bill, they have to pass it along. And at some point, that premium parking fee isn't going to make any sense. So they'll do what, like so many things we've seen in the cities happen, where you get credit card parking meters. They'll move towards that for electron charge. That's not hard to think about. We see that with parking. We see that with gasoline dispensing. Just assume it's going to be sort of a credit card world for all that in the future. I think it's more realistic and practical. But having it available, having preferred parking in a better spot in the parking lot, whether it be hospital or anywhere in this city, would be well worth paying that fee. So I think as we see this industry growing, we have a long time before we really need to start worrying. There's a lot of discussion about clustering. We would love to have that problem. We're seeing a lot of buyers all over this country. It is very diffused. It's all over the place. We listed a long time where to launch. We couldn't launch in 50 states. We didn't have enough product. And what we found is every state, every dealer was clamoring for these vehicles. So I think you're going to see a normalized distribution. I do agree with Miles that there's going to be some concentration. Urban areas are particularly advantageous for battery-operated vehicles. We have time to plan. I don't think we have anything to worry about in this immediate future. I do agree with Miles, too, that good planning on the regulatory front, making sure we work this together while we have this nice window of growth is the right thing to do. So I don't think we have something to worry about yet. And I'm pleased to see that so many groups are working together to do it the right way. And again, I think Miles covered this. I don't think I need to go through it. This is not my swim lane anyways. For me to talk about utilities would be a little bit, kind of over and above what I do for a living. But, this chart was thrown in here just to show that really the grid is designed for peak demand, as it should be. But we see that, at nighttime charging, which was discussed earlier, that would make a lot of sense. We also think through smart grid communications that are built in thoughtfully, you could go in your garage, plug it in, and maybe it's not charging, but it knows, the system can tell when it should start charging. There'd be sort of a cadencing of when vehicles would be charging in the evening for, we'll call it congested areas where there's a lot of concern over electron movement. This is the chart I think I'd like you to pay most attention to. Barbara and Genevieve and I have stared at it long enough that we don't need to see it anymore. But essentially, it's where vehicles are and where they're charging. The green is at home. Vehicles are at home a lot, and they charge a lot. The red is workplace or multi-dwelling. So you can see if we solve the green and the red, we're pretty much all set. Now, the nice disruptive thing that's happening, we're seeing, is there's a new entrant that I think they're doing it because it's good for business, and that is the Best Buys, the Home Depots, the grocery stores, who are putting in solar trees. And if you've seen a solar tree, it's essentially solar panels on a stem, and then electric vehicles come to it, maybe 6 underneath it, and they're charging. They're not taking a lot of ground real estate up because it's just a pole going up. But yet, electric vehicles can cluster, and they can cluster there for a while. And what are they doing? They're not standing there around the tree. They're going into the store. So what you have is a new format for someone to provide electron use for our vehicles. At any time you can take it out of a single set of hands and have multiple players, everyone benefits because the competition increases. So there's ways to approach this that are beginning to make sense, that have some greater commercial viability. I think we're going to see more of it. We've been doing it a lot of our technical facilities and our plants, And it's really working. And there we are clustering vehicles, and we are trying to, break things, and we're trying to do a lot of things to see what problems we're going to have. And so far, so good. So again, I know we have to deal with public charging, but I think we have time. I think we have to look for meaningful, thoughtful public charging, certainly starting with structures and not going crazy by putting a lot of pedestals around the city. But I think, again, once we do decide how many we need and where they go, through a credit card and commercial, transaction approach, it's going to resolve some of those concerns. We'll know where it makes sense and when to do it. So this is the same chart in a different illustrative way. One of the things that there is a lot of discussion on and a lot of haranguing around is the greenhouse gas nature and how green are our vehicles, and they're very green. In particular, when we look at the California grid, and as they become more renewable, our cars get greener too. So this essentially is a chart that shows that the greener the grid, the greener the vehicle, and we certainly are seeing with all the requirements at each state level of new renewables being added and different approaches being taken, that we will ride that positive wave with them. I think that's really important is often the thing we always don't spend enough time on, and that is creating the right amount of subgroups in communities, cities, and states to get this done. It's not something you can legislate. It's not something you can mandate. It's getting the right people together who know how to broker this quickly and effectively. And I have to say, I work in a number of energy fronts from biofuels to hydrogen. This community working together is the strongest cohesive group of people I've ever seen around the nation. So we've got a fighting chance here. We should all, give ourselves a, pat on the back for it. But you really need to have a project leader, whether it be at the state level, at the local level, at the community level. You have to get your Clean Cities orgs pulling in and helping. DOT is quite essential. Permitting and others. So you could read the list. I'm not going to read it to you. But, again, what they do is they're providing a number of benefits, and we're all working on it at the same time. I talked earlier about the time to get permits in place, the time to get some of these 240 chargers in. That can all be reduced. That is non-critical work. I mean, it's just a matter of how do you get a permit through quicker and how do you get it through cheaper? How do you work with the home builders associations? How do you build a home purposely built for green energy of the future? These are all manageable, and they're all being worked on. And the other good thing that's happening, these best practices are moving quickly around the country. So if the city of Atlanta has come up with a good team and they found a new aha moment, that immediately is transferred to California, to Michigan, vice versa. So there's no delay in best practices being implemented. Here, there's a lot of people working on Northeast Corridor and a number of fronts where all these good practices are happening. But it takes boots on the ground, and it takes convening, and you need a convener, and you need to get these folks together, including OEMs. We have a lot of partners in the space, and this is a nice time to recognize them a little bit. SPX is our third-party provider. They know our business very well. They know our vehicle upside and down. They know homes and dealerships and buildings and how to put in electrification where, again, you can, charge your vehicle. And so we are in hopes that as a dealer sells a vehicle, the first call is to SPX or a similar provider, and then they can talk to you about the number of EVSCs that are out there. Our list of partners is growing. They're all very good. We test these units with our vehicles and make sure they comply. We're working with DOE, all these wonderful trade organizations, NARUC, everyone, on ensuring that we're doing it the right way. And again, I think this is hunting pretty well for the industry. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the other electron that's near and dear to my heart, and that's hydrogen. I used to run the fuel cell demonstration program. I know intimately what's going on with this, and we are not the only OEM in this business. There's 5 others, and they're doing very well on their progress with the vehicle level. Our program alone has generated over 2 million hydrogen miles with regular drivers in those vehicles. We've had over 20,000 fill-ups with hydrogen. Very simple. A person's driving a hydrogen vehicle, they pull up to a hydrogen station, they fill it up like they would a gallon of gas. And I think that's a pretty good proof point that this is not some science project. This is real miles by real drivers. And so this is coming. And you say, well, wait a minute, you're just launching battery vehicles, and now you're talking fuel cell vehicles. Why does it matter? Well, as we move towards reducing the amount of greenhouse gases, and we want to have zero emissions, these both have to be here. They both are used very differently. I mean, a battery is great in a relatively smaller, compact sedan, and you can use it in an urban setting like here. There is some range issues. We are hopeful in the future that there'll be greater range. I know Barbara discussed lithium air. That would be fantastic. There is a lot of more R&D, in particular with the cycles. It's not that you could get that first cycle very far, even farther than the numbers you mentioned, but the second cycle is the tough one. So there's still a lot of exciting science there, but the truth is with a hydrogen vehicle, you can really build up a hydrogen vehicle. They can be duty vehicles, medium duty vehicles, and they can have duty cycles. And it can go hundreds and hundreds of miles. So again, you can go maybe 300 miles, 400 miles with zero emissions, and yet you could be, pulling a lot of stuff or doing things. So you see both serve a purpose, both have great emission standards, and we need to get both fronts hunting pretty well. So that's my pitch, and I guess it's over to Kyle. Okay.
Who's doing the slide? Oh, okay. I'm probably going to jump around a little bit because a lot of what I was going to talk about, I guess one of the virtues of going at the end is that, some of your talking points get taken up. Believe it or not, this was about 15 years ago. I worked on the EV commercialization effort in California back in the 1990s when California was first pursuing their zero-emission vehicle mandate. So I've been doing EVs pretty much right out of college and other alternative fuel vehicles. That happens to be the GM EV1. At the time, you had the Toyota RAV4, you had a Nissan Ultra. Chrysler had two products, both minivans, believe it or not, a Plymouth Voyager minivan, and I forgot what the Dodge equivalent was. We had the Honda EV Plus, we had the Ford Ranger electric pickup truck, and you had the Chevrolet S10 electric pickup truck. So there were a lot of different product models that were made available in the mid-1990s. Now, there are a couple of differences, and I just want to highlight those while I'm on this particular slide. For example, in California, the general public could not purchase an electric vehicle. For the most part, all you had was a lease option available to you. Fleet operators did have an opportunity to buy some of those electric vehicle models, but not all of them. Let's see. There was a battle going on at the time between different groups of auto manufacturers on what the correct charger connector device should be. What should the plug look like? You had GM and Toyota in one camp with their inductive paddle, and you had, believe it or not, a split even amongst the remaining auto manufacturers on what the conductive charger paddle should look like. So when we were trying to do public charging stations, we literally had and some of you won't know what this reference means, but we had a beta versus VHS battle going on. We had literally an inductive charger sited right next to a conductive charger, so that if you went to a public charging station, depending on what vehicle model you had, at least you had a charger that you could connect to. So you had duplication at every public charging station to satisfy what was going on in the marketplace, which was a lack of consensus on what the connector design should be. We also didn't have mass media marketing for the most part. I know GM developed a terrific commercial. It's on YouTube if you want to see it, with all the electric appliances coming alive and going out and looking for the EV1. It aired in the LA market once, but none of the other auto manufacturers even bothered to do any television advertising. Contrast that with today, where I see the Chevy Volt commercials and the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi commercials on a fairly regular rotation. There wasn't a lot in the way of print ads either. The other thing I want to emphasize, and this has sort of been touched on a little bit, it was a narrow market launch. It was only in certain areas of Southern California, actually certain areas within California, that you could actually get some of these vehicles. You had dealerships that were designated as the exclusive distributors of these vehicles. And you want to contrast that with today, where you do have some true national market launches, especially with the 2012 model year. So it's a very different set of circumstances. But one of the biggest lessons learned for the electric utilities from the California 1990s experience, and this is a lesson learned by all the utilities across our sector, is that we are not the market makers for electric transportation. We can help facilitate it along, but if the product isn't going to be commercialized, then a lot of what you've done as far as infrastructure planning, public charging, is for naught. We had a lot of public charging that was invested in California in the 1990s that once the product was pulled from the road, just basically became public art. There was no use for it whatsoever. One of the responsibilities of the utilities, believe it or not, when the vendor that originally did the installation and the maintenance of those public charging stations, as a safety issue, we had to go out and pull a lot of these things once they had been abandoned. So there will always be a role for the electric utility, whether it be public safety, employee communications, customer communications, things like that. I'll actually jump ahead to part of that Miles covered a lot of this. You know, we go into these types of issues on new technology with sort of this existing utility regulatory framework. He touched on all of these points. Is it a least cost service that the utility is providing? Is it used and useful? Is it in the public interest? What role does the regulated utility play? All these questions here are the exact same set of questions that a utility is going to face when it goes to its regulator and talks about what role should it have in this emerging electric transportation market. And so Miles already touched a lot of this. I just want to really emphasize that that is a conversation that's going on today with a lot of the utilities at the state level to try and explore how the utility's job description could be updated. This is just simply a punch list of what the utility's current job is. It's basically least cost service, load management, system safety and reliability. We develop customer tariffs or electricity prices. We do customer communications, although I wonder how many here actually read a lot of the bill stuffers that we include. Most people have signed up for electronic billing, so they don't even get the paper stuff anymore. We do community stewardship and donation projects, things of that nature, and then our trade association membership. I happen to be a member of Edison Electric Institute, or my company is, and I co-chair their electric transportation task force amongst the Washington Reps community. So I already touched on some of the lessons from California. Again, this slide, what happened when these vehicle leases expired, GM took them out to the desert and crushed them. Honda was worse. They took the EV Plus and they actually put them through a shredder. But what the utility industry realized, again, is that we can be huge proponents, huge cheerleaders for this type of technology, but until there's a sustainable business plan for the manufacturers, we will have a secondary citizenship or a secondary role when it comes to the success of the marketing. Now, what we did, or what we've tried to do in the electricity sector, there are certain utilities that have been doing this for a long time. When I worked on this, it was 15 years ago. A lot of the issues we tried to address with 15 years ago are still relevant today. For example, when you think of a public charging station, how many of you think that it has to be compliant with the Americans with Disability Act? Not many people realize that if you're going to do that, you have to at least have some sort of ADA compliance strategy. So what we do is we take some lessons we learned when we did this back in the 90s, and we're sharing that nationally across all the other electric utility companies that are becoming more interested in this issue. What we're trying to do is figure out, when we have the conversation with the regulator, what is our new job description? And so I've laid out 6 of them here. Customer outreach and education is probably the easiest one. We can put information on our website, do an electric vehicle Q&A, that type of public outreach and information, make it available, links to where more information is available, like through EDTA, things of that nature. We can develop critical infrastructure and services to support the safe and secure operation of EVs. One of the activities that we're interested in doing is training for emergency response personnel, for the folks that will be out there responding to an electric vehicle accident. That's the type of activity that a lot of utilities are interested in providing some resources and time to help. Another one might be in states like Oregon, where you have metropolitan areas where there's a very strong business plan for putting in public charging stations. You'll have third parties that come and install them. But a lot of EV drivers tend to also want to go to the east side of the state, which is very rural, very remote, and it can't support a third-party strategy for public charging station. We've had a problem in the state of Oregon, which happens to be one of the states where we serve, with stranded gasoline vehicles. Our worry is that you might have stranded electric vehicles. So maybe the local utility provides some sort of safety net for people that are traveling in those vehicles in parts of the state where there is not a business opportunity for third-party recharging. Facilitate the implementation of residential, commercial, and public charging infrastructure throughout a utility service territory. This is let me give you a great example that really underscores one of the points that Miles made. In Oregon, again, the governor convened an alternative fuel vehicle infrastructure work group. And they had a couple meetings, and then they thought to invite the utilities to come in. And they said, we've been working on how we want to make Oregon really progressive and really supportive of electric vehicles. And we'd like to have, as part of our recommendation to the governor, that the electric utilities will install 1,000 public charging stations across the state. The first thing we said was, time out. You've got the State Energy Agency, you have the AG's office, you have the State Environmental Agency, where's the Utility Commission? And so one of our jobs, and we were a little bit of a bad guy, was saying it's not going to be easy to assume utilities can do a whole bunch of electric public charging stations or even be the provider for residential recharging. And so one of the things we worked with is to get a stimulus grant for the state of Oregon so that the local utilities commission could open up a proceeding, start asking some of these questions, take stakeholder input, and really look to develop a more solid foundation or strategy for how that state would support the rollout of electric vehicles. That's something that we're trying to replicate in a whole number of states across the country. Number 4, understand and mitigate potential system impacts. You've already seen a couple slides on that. We do look at this as yet another electric appliance. It's equivalent to when a lot of the houses that didn't used to have air conditioning ended up going with air conditioning, and then we had to make distribution system impacts. Initially, it wasn't as much of an issue. You had these one-off systems going in. We could accommodate the pace at which we had to make the improvements to the distribution system. As soon as you get large enough amounts, we have to go in and talk to our regulator and say, look, we need to make a distribution system improvement here because we've got a cluster of air conditioning systems that have gone into this neighborhood. Same thing's likely going to happen with electric vehicles. So we see some analogies from the transition from swamp coolers, I don't know how many people remember swamp coolers, to central air conditioning. Same sort of thing could happen. And I think, really to underscore the point, the pace of commercialization will be really critical as far as how challenging it will be for us to be able to integrate electric vehicles. Number 5, adopt plug-in vehicles within utility fleets. That's certainly something that we've always tried to do. There are a number of us that are partnering with an EPRI-led project and auto manufacturers to develop a plug-in hybrid utility trouble truck. We like the idea because oftentimes our trouble trucks are going out into areas where there's no power because we're fixing power lines. The beauty of having a large battery pack with that trouble truck is not only can it get us to the location, but we can reverse the flow of electricity and actually use it as a remote source of power for our tools and equipment. So one of the reasons why we're pursuing that is not just to improve the environment, not just to improve energy security, but to also provide some real new tools for us to make our jobs more efficient. And then finally, number 6 is really, and this is really a challenging one for our industry, and that is conduct active research and development and demo projects. I like to tell folks that the electric utility industry really is not a developer of technology. We're more of a consumer of technology. There's very few of us, and it's usually states like California that can spread the cost a whole bunch of customers that are really doing a lot of the cutting edge work. A lot of the other states, and our utility covers states as different as the state of Iowa versus the state of California. It's really difficult to go in and make an argument to a economic regulator that investing a lot of money in R&D where you can't really measure what the end benefit will be to customers will be, that's a very difficult, challenging thing to try and do. So you're going to see sort of this natural conservatism out of the electricity sector, and we'll probably lean on a lot of the big utilities to sort of do the bleeding edge R&D work. We already talked a little bit about distribution system impacts, but the thing I like about this slide is it puts it into a little bit of relative perspective. You've got the Tesla EV on the top, and it's all about how these systems are designed, but the Tesla EV putting out roughly 19.2 kilowatts of peak summer demand is more than the entire household consumption in Springdale, Arizona in the summertime of 7.7. So these are not small loads. These are manageable loads, but some of the different ways that you charge these vehicles, depending on how quickly you're pulling the power out of the grid, can really impact that residential demand. So one of the things that we want to see is how can we optimize the electric vehicle when it does interface with our equipment so that we're not having to go and do a bunch of unnecessary, costly distribution system upgrades. And I'm going to wrap up here. This slide is available. It just goes with some of our initial impacts analysis work and conclusions that we've worked on with EPRI. And then I'll leave you with this. This is a report. It's freely downloadable from EPRI.com. I was one of the co-authors of this study with Mark Duvall's team at EPRI. What we tried to do is do a snapshot of where the industry is today We tried to pull lessons learned from the early marketing efforts in California, as well as the early marketing efforts in this decade, and put it all into one report. The target audience for this is not the general public. It really is other utilities, energy commission staff, state energy office staff, and utility commission staff, trying to be a good resource at Primer on sort of our state of thinking, where the utility is. So I didn't want to bore you with all sorts of detailed engineering analysis. If you're really into that stuff, I'd recommend taking a look at this report. It's a good primer on both on-road, off-road equipment, what we've learned as far as charging equipment and system impact analysis. So let me wrap it up there and say I did switch from what I would call environmental policy and strategy to congressional relations, government affairs. I've only been in D.C. for about a year. So this is my contact information. Do you have any questions? I'll be more than happy to provide copies of the reports, links, things of that nature. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was great. Thank you so much, Kyle. That was excellent, an excellent presentation. All you guys did such a great job. And I think one of the takeaways that I got, maybe you guys got, was the optimism in everybody's presentation, and that this electric vehicle bus, so as you say, has left the station. And this is electric vehicles are moving forward. Barbara pointed out the invaluable role of EPRI in making this happen. Genevieve talked about EDTA, the Electric Drive Transportation Association, that is moving the argument forward, and she pointed out some really interesting things about, you know, if you guys are just sick of oil dependence and getting our fuel from foreign nations, this is the answer, and our country needs to be the leader in electric vehicles. Miles pointed out the regulatory issues involved and follow the money, financial challenges involved. Mary Beth did an excellent job of talking about General Motors and from the industry perspective, and Kyle, you just did a great job. I'm so sorry I didn't really talk about what fabulous person you were when I introduced you at first. You did an excellent job. I have to tell you guys, apologize, we got a little bit of a late start. It's 1:30. Usually, you know, our luncheon session's in then. So if any of you need to leave, please do. But if you'd like to stay for another 10 or 15 minutes, I'll be happy to facilitate a Q&A session. I know a lot of you probably have some questions for panelists. Thank you, Alicia. Hi. You need the mic.
Joe Edgell from Congressman Jim Moran's office. When a number of the presentations relied on using car batteries to offset peak load, things like that, storage overnight. Problem is, I own the battery in my car, and there's a limited number of charge cycles for that battery, and no one talked about how somebody's going to pay me for the impact that using my battery in my car as storage has on my car, not to mention the fact that it might be charged in the morning when I want to drive someplace. Can someone maybe quickly address that? Have you thought about the pricing and the rebate that the owner of the car is going to get for the impact on the battery?
Do you want me to go ahead? Barbara, do you want to go ahead?
You want to go ahead a little bit, Mary Beth, and I can follow?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. I think you have a couple of questions in there. The first one is you're assuming the vehicle has electrons that will give back to the grid if needed. Okay, so is there a trade-off between the vehicle's fully charged and those electrons are being used for something else and you get them back? Right now, our vehicles are not bi-directional. They're one direction. We're getting the vehicle mature. We still have a warranty of 8 years on the vehicle for this one direction. The other thing, though, that you mentioned was, we'll call it battery farms, or they could be fuel cell stack farms, which is very good for rural areas or in areas where the peak can be high and you need to have renewables stored. So solar and wind, as Barbara mentioned, very unpredictable. However, you can take solar and wind and put it into storage, particularly useful in areas where you don't want on transmission management, and they can store it and then dispense it as required. There's a natural automotive life for batteries and fuel cells, but there's an outstanding life after the first use when you're done with that battery and you get a replacement for this, we'll call it these farms, which are electrical farms. So there is long life after vehicle use. So I know that, I don't know if you were going there, but I think those are two scenarios to think about. All right, well, then, Barbara try, see if she can answer it.
So one thing I think, actually each of us alluded to, but we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about is this smart grid. And I mentioned communications and intelligence, but I think maybe that would help to address what you're talking about. When you get intelligence into the system and two-way communications, you'll also know the price of the electricity. So you will have the capability to manage your home energy management system if you'd like to do it. There are some, I'm sure, as we say, who would like to set it and forget it, and that source of architecture will be available. But for those who would like to be more involved, more incrementally involved, why the customer can interact around that, and I think perhaps that would address your concern regarding the whole charging infrastructure.
Well, let me just throw in one example. Right now, a lot of utilities offer up a service to their customer that for $50 a year, if you agree that the utility can idle your air conditioning unit on and off during peak demand period, that's how you'll be compensated for agreeing for us to be able to access your property that way. There's been conversations about something analogous. It has to rely on smart grid because you're going to need a much more dynamic bi-directional communication with the vehicle and the grid to be able to accomplish that. But it's analogous to what utilities currently do with demand response.
I'm not sure it does rely on smart grid. I think your point is right on. The rebates have to work. The commission has to consider, whether or not the money works for the customer, has to communicate to the customer. Not the commission, the provider of the vehicle or the electric utility has to provide them a sense of what the actual cost of recharging that is. Maybe this much should be in the car, and rather than in the meter or in whatever you're charging it through. But I think you're right. I mean, how you will know whether this is a good deal or not is if the money works. And if it doesn't, people won't do it.
Oh, if the question boils down to, does the consumer who buys the vehicle know what they're paying for charging? That is absolutely being addressed. So I don't think this is an elusive, buried into the bill, can't break it out from the TV charging or the whole total home. No, I think there's a lot of good effort there to ensure that the customer does know fair value. Fair value depends on where you live and what the rates are, because every state has different charging, kilowatt hour cost. So I think that one's being addressed handily. Every utility you can call and find out, I'm thinking about buying this electric vehicle. What do you think about this sort of 240 charging? What are your rates that you're on peak, off peak? I think that's pretty well communicated right now. So sorry, I just didn't understand the question. Another question.
Yes, hi. Great presentation. Excuse me, presentation. I'm John Cummings with Hart Energy. Kind of an A and a B part to this question. We have, of course, certainly expansion with the fleet for electric vehicles. And then, of course, in the presentation about the distributed storage, I'm not sure what the exact term is. My question is about the rare earth metals for meeting all of this battery storage that we need. And secondly, then, obviously, those cost factors, availability. What do you see 20 years out as to the rate of penetration of electric vehicles into the fleet? We get about 13.5 million units a year, 240 million registered on-road vehicles.
I think this is an excellent question. With regard to rare earth is mostly used in motors and magnets. Okay, so when you think of rare earth in a vehicle, you're better associating that with hybrids as opposed to electric vehicles. So it's a very important differentiator. And there's a wonderful professor at Iowa State who's been leading all this activity of rare earth for a long time. And I just was with him at Iowa State. He's world renowned. And he said, first of all, we ought to stop panicking about rare earth. He said the California mines have reopened. There is rare earth being mined there. People are getting a better grasp of how to extract and sell and commercialize here. Now, there's a whole discussion on metals in general. You're talking in materials. So lithium from other places of the world, and things that maybe not are rare, but in fact, are not local. So I think watching that is an important thing to do. I think the thing you need to consider too is composition of batteries is going to change. I mean, we are definitely on lithium now, but you're going to see different lithium, cobalt, a lot of combinations for optimization in the future. So I think right now what we're seeing is I don't see sort of like a severe shortage list. I think that we have a little reprieve right now. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to, the main tenets of rare earth or any materials is reuse and reduce. And so what you're good, and yet have the same performance or improved performance. So certainly smart scientists and engineers are working on reduce and reuse. And we're also working on alternatives that you get the same performance. So I think it's right now a good spot to be in particular since with rare earth we've reopened our minds domestically.
And I've seen analysis, and I think Mary Beth would support this, that shows that we'll be fine for this century, and as she indicated, why as we move forward into the next century, presumably the technology will have advanced even further, and who knows where we'll be at that point. There was some initial concern that there was a great deal of the market in China, and that China was very much engaged in developing that further around the rest of the globe, but the domestic sources are mightily available for what we need now.
And the way of prediction is watch catalyst development. It's about catalyst, right? It's about getting things to perform spark, and that's really where, there's a lot of great science going on. So catalyst maturity is going to help us all the way and reduce our material use.
We have time for a couple more.
Hi, Jamie Wickett with Hogan Lovells. I wonder if you all could focus a little bit more on the stress on the grid. And I realize there are so many questions there, many more questions than answers, I think. But I guess the way I would ask the question is, are utilities today making any significant changes in terms of distribution, for instance, to accommodate and given that we're only at the nascent stage of EV adoption, given the projections, which could, wide range of variability there, what do we really expect? And I think we sort of heard some EVs won't really add too much to the burden on the grid, but we also heard major improvements necessary, and I wonder if some of you could comment on that.
I can talk to that too. Shall I start?
Let the regulator go first.
He's really good.
Utility, I forgot one of these. Utilities, this is a spicy thing to say, so I'm sure I'll get killed later for saying this, but a good utility actually does two things. One is it provides reliable and affordable electrons, and the other is it works its commission very effectively to get a good rate of return for shareholders. So on the distribution, where there are vehicles plugged in, close to those vehicles, the distribution system investment for that local circuit is pretty big, given the fence line of that local circuit. That gets dwarfed in the enormous system of the electric system. So for the bulk electric power system, not a big investment. For individual circuits, a proportionally significant where we think it's going to happen. I think some of the big policy questions that haven't been raised here, though, are if we're trying to predict out where these things are going to go, are there customer buying information behavioral patterns that we're going to want to collect up information about? And do customers want companies to know that stuff about their behaviors? Is it equitable for all ratepayers to pay for distribution system upgrades that only people who are buying new electric cars are actually going to take advantage of? Is there a fairness issue there? There are a lot of kind of policy questions about connecting incentives and who pays into the incentives pool with those who take out because they're now the owners of a smart meter or a smart meter collected to an EV, and some of those other issues. I'm not offering those questions with any kinds of answers. I think there are ways to get smart answers to those, and I think we've got 257 very sharp public service commissioners out in the states who are working on those things. That doesn't answer your question, it just adds more questions onto it. To say, you asked a simple question that actually opens the door to a hell of a lot of very complex questions.
Let me add two quick comments to that. One, he's absolutely correct in the sense that what our industry is trying to do is get the conversation started between the regulator and the local utility to make sure that some of these policy issues are addressed, because the way they're answered in a state like California is going to be very different than how they're answered in a state like Wyoming. but it's important to get the conversation started and try and figure out at least what your initial policy response will be before you actually have a problem. Do we think that there's going to be a tremendous problem? I think more of the load growth in the near term is going to be driven by households adding that second big screen TV than an electric vehicle in the near term. For us, it's just another appliance. There will be localized problems. If you're in a very old neighborhood and it's at a very old distribution grid and very old circuits, then even the big screen TV will trip that circuit. So we're going to be looking for that. Separately, on the idea of DC fast charging or level 3 charging, that's one that we've told the charging proponents out there, the public charging guys that are installing those. And in the state of Oregon, they've got a stimulus grant to install 50 statewide. A DC fast charger is something together, altogether different. That's like an arc welder in a residential neighborhood being sited, or at least in an area that is not sited industrial at this point. What we're telling the owners of that type of equipment, or the folks that want to pursue that business model, which is the recharging in 15, 20 minutes type of service station type model, you have to talk to the utility before you even, draw up engineering diagrams for that type of equipment, because you run the risk of really creating a local distribution issue, hitting unforeseen demand charges from the local utility, all sorts of domino effects. So for us, level 1, level 2 isn't really an issue. Could be an issue in really old neighborhoods if there's a large number of vehicles that make their way into local garages. The DC fast charging level 3, that's an issue today, that if you're looking to have that go into a utility's backyard, you better be working very closely with the local utility.
And just to expand briefly on Kyle's point, and Genevieve actually mentioned this in her presentation, but originally, going back to the beginning of the last century, all you had were lights. And then after the advent of lights, why then you had major appliances that were electrified. And then after that, in about the middle of that last century, why then all of a sudden we had air conditioning introduced, which was another big electricity consumption technology. And then after that, we had the electronic load, which, as I mentioned, is going to be 30%. And each time, the electric utility industry has learned to adapt through the technology that it produces to begin to integrate that and accommodate that. And so this, yes, will we have to be addressing that? Absolutely. But we can and we will be doing that, I think, all of us together.
One last question. Sorry, your hand was raised first, or I saw it first.
Hi, Tim Aiken, Jim Moran's office. There wasn't much of discussion of vehicle to grid in terms of what is necessary for the industry to come forward and make the investment to allow the customers, the drivers of these vehicles, to want to be able to hook up and sell their power back to utilities. So I'm sort of curious, you need to focus on a particular service area? Are you concentrating the sale of these cars or the lease of these cars? Is there some critical mass that essentially brings private sector investment from the utility industries to want to provide the infrastructure for the hookup? Because I think that's a dynamic that helps move this forward at a quantum level if you can get there.
Let me take a go at this from the first. I think your colleague was sort of getting at this too. I think what's, if you listen to Mr. Willinghoff at FERC, he has a wonderful presentation about vehicle to grid. And actually, it starts more specifically, it's V to H. It's vehicle to home. And then V to G is the next level of bilateral communication between vehicles and the grid. And that there are money-making models for consumers in both of them. But first, it's a car. But I think first we have to make it work it has to work for consumers as a vehicle. And then as a load leveling device or an emergency power source, and then V to G. I think that is the cool frontier, but I think the initial market it's your car.
Yeah, I would probably echo that. I think, like I made the point earlier, most utilities are technology consumers, not developers, and so they would still look at V2G as off on the horizon. I mean, it relies from the utility's perspective on the vehicle actually being compatible with a V2G type of scenario. And what I understand, these first few generations of electric vehicles are not equipped to be vehicle to grid. Then it relies on the utility having worked out a solution with its economic regulator to go ahead and install the other side of the equation. And until you can really make a cogent argument, a solid argument that there's a clear benefit back to your customers, I don't see very many states, utilities, or their regulators that are going to be leading on vehicle to grid.
But and just to follow up, as Meredith said, but when you consolidate batteries in a second use and sort of second life, and use them as battery farms, and they can do, firming. You can store intermittent power, and I think that's a very that's something that industry on both sides are looking very closely at it.
And that's a key strategy for reducing battery pack costs. We're very, as an industry, we're very interested in secondary use of EV battery packs.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Laura. Nice to meet you, too.
See you on the circuit all the time.
See him on the circuit. Please, they don't let me.
It's so nice to see a bright color on a gloomy day. Winter color.